Robert C. Clark, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the Icelandic hemp podcast.
Cool.
Or,
Good to be here.
Or cannabis podcast.
Well, if we're talking about the plant in general, it'd be a cannabis podcast.
Exactly. Yes. The word cannabis in Iceland, it's a bit controversial. That's why you know, I think we've been trying to get it more smoothly in to people's mind and by using the word hemp.
Right. I agree with you there that the British use of the word cannabis has always just meant cannabis drugs. And that's basically how Europe looks at English. So.
But I write here, you are not a hemp activist.
No.
You're not political in any way. You're a writer, researcher, and a scientist.
I try to remain impartial. That's good science.
And you've been doing research on cannabis since when?
1971, really, when I went to university.
And what led you to be interested in cannabis? What happened?
Well, I found it to be a fascinating plant. It was widely used in the marijuana form when I was in university. And yeah, it's fascinating. It's a plant I realized was important then, and the more I study it, the more I realize it's widely important. So.
Did something change in the years after 71, regarding the plant and the smoking of marijuana?
It became a lot more of an issue. In the 70s, nobody really cared much. No. I'm sure you could get in trouble for it. But when the 80s came around and it became business and a lot more people got into it, it became a big issue. Okay. And it remains so today.
Okay. How come? What do you mean with a big issue?
People can't get their heads around it. People don't know what to do. And education is lacking. Of course, that's been our aim for years. Different organizations I've been part of as publishing groups and trying to get out information for people. And it's still a hurdle. I mean, the generation that really fought us is mostly gone.
Yeah, exactly.
But the momentum is still there.
What about when you say research? Because I heard that there's probably done like tens of thousands of different research on cannabis.
Sure.
In a medical direction. But at the same time, I often hear, the medical society, they always point to this. They say it's a fact that there's always a lack of research. Is this true? What do they mean by that?
They mean there's a lack of research that proves their negative point.
Okay.
That was rather cynical, but it's also true. Most research in the 1970s and a bit prior to that was supported by United Nations grants, by people looking for what was wrong with cannabis. They we're talking about drug cannabis now, not hemp cannabis, but they were looking for what's wrong with it. And they didn't get the answers they wanted. They spent millions of dollars trying to do this. And you can find all the research that was published, and that was somewhat slanted, but still pretty good research. But they were doing research with an answer in mind. Yeah. And they didn't find it. No. And then research stopped almost completely.
But what you're saying, you're actually saying that the research are there.
There is now.
It fully researched?
Oh, no. Nothing is ever fully researched. But in this case, medical research is certainly important now. People think it's all about CBD. All the research that's been done up till 3 or 4 years ago was about THC. Yeah. And a byproduct of looking for things that was wrong with it was they found out first there really isn't anything wrong with it.
That's a problem for some.
There's some social problems, of course, with anything. And it's not, like everything on the planet, it's not for everybody.
No. But is it a big problem for, big pharma, you think?
I don't think big pharma cares.
No.
I think they see it as a threat, certainly.
Yeah.
And, because people can self-medicate. And that empowers them. It doesn't matter if they use turmeric or cannabis. It's empowering them to take care of their own health. And that worries health systems in general, especially those with a profit motive. But people are always thinking that Big Pharma is interested in cannabis. No, they're not.
It's not a good business because it heals, or what?
No, it's not a good business for them because they can't control it.
What do you mean by that?
They want IP. They want what's
which
called
is?
intellectual property. They want patents.
Yeah. And it's hard to patent a plant.
You can't patent a naturally occurring substance.
No.
You can patent a novel use of it,
Yeah.
but you can't patent it.
Okay, so for them, it's not a good business at all.
No, I wouldn't think they'd have any interest at all. They're only interested in the negative ramifications on the business they already have.
What about drugs that they are produced that contain cannabis?
Well, there's
Like I think I've heard the name Sativex somewhere.
Sativex and Epidiolex,
Yeah.
both produced by GW Pharmaceuticals. Sativex is the active ingredient is THC.
Mm-hmm.
There's CBD in it, but to lower side effects in naive users.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Generally, they didn't claim any pharmaceutical functionality to CBD, only THC, and that's what they did their trials on.
Mm-hmm.
They realized as adjunct to doing that research that CBD may also have value.
Mm-hmm.
Then they came out with Epidiolex, which is only CBD.
Okay. When was this? When started to make
Epidiolex
this?
must have come out about really bad with time frames, 8 or 10 years ago.
Okay.
Sativex was approved probably in about 2005.
Okay.
Somewhere in there.
But before we go into the cannabinoids and how many they are and what they do and such, you said hemp plant, industrial hemp, and then medical cannabis.
Yeah.
What's the difference between these two realities, or
hemp,
what you would call it?
Hemp to me is the cannabis varieties that are non-drug.
Also non-THC.
Non-drug, basically. I mean, they're not used. They're not grown for drug use.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean drug use? What is a drug use?
For harvesting drugs, for harvesting compounds.
Mm-hmm.
They're grown for the fiber
Mm-hmm.
and the seed.
Yeah.
And that's hemp traditionally. It became called industrial hemp because small farmers and gardeners didn't grow it anymore and industry took over.
Mm-hmm.
That was largely the Soviet bloc that really kept that going.
Mm-hmm.
And they made it more industrial, and then people picked up on that later.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an industrial plant, but it's also a farm and garden plant traditionally.
Okay, but what about flowers and leaves from industrial hemp plant? Is it not usable?
If it's just for industrial hemp or fiber hemp or seed hemp, it's a waste product.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to go over to the drug plant side of cannabis,
Mm-hmm.
you have high THC drug plants and you have high CBD drug plants,
Mm-hmm.
and you have ones intermediate.
Mm-hmm.
They have about equal amounts of THC and CBD.
Mm-hmm. But what about all the others? All the other cannabinoids, because you hear people talking about THC, CBD, and now things are like CBN is getting popular here as well. They say that it's really effective for sleeping disorders, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What about other cannabinoids? Have they been? I believe they're like 130, yeah, 135.
Yeah, it's kind of an exaggeration. Naturally occurring in any amount that enough to matter.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just look at 8 or 10.
Really? So there's
and the acid forms of each too, but that doesn't make it a different compound. I mean, it does chemically, but
okay. So they're not like 130 different cannabinoids, all with their own special, effectiveness. Or
they may have special effectiveness. That's where there hasn't been enough research.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people are just now looking at CBD.
Yeah.
And just the last few years.
Okay.
And we still don't know how efficacious CBD is.
Mm-hmm.
The anecdotal evidence is super strong.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows somebody who's had really a miracle experience almost.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you see this yourself?
Not personally, but I have talked to many people who claim these advantages. And of course, you have to believe them. It's their life.
Mm-hmm.
But also, close to half of medical indications of modest severity at least go away on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to do proper clinical trials
Mm-hmm.
to see what's going on with things. Pharmaceutical companies aren't going to pay for it. because they don't have a vested interest.
No, but who pays for it then?
It's been done these days by clinicians who are curious, who do believe that it can have positive effects. And the handcuffs are off these days. Now graduate students can study it. I monitor what goes on in the research, and in the first 3 months of this year, there was more. I'm not looking at medical research. There's too much of it, and it's not my field. But if you look at all the cannabis research that's not medical, there was more research in the first 3 months of this year than there was in the entire year before. Published research.
What do you think is causing it? Is it the growing market in the States?
No, it's that people aren't afraid. Universities are no longer afraid to let their graduate students study what they're interested in. And of course, more and more people are interested in studying cannabis because it's more and more in the news. It's more and more in our lives. So.
But tell me, how did you start, your research when you were starting on cannabis? You say you started researching it. What does it mean?
Researching for me was going to the library.
And just doing a lot of reading.
Seeing what was previously published. Okay. And there was plenty there, even in the early 70s. Plenty to write an undergraduate dissertation, which is what I did. So that was my first research, was just to finish my dissertation.
And what took over after that?
I went to work in the Netherlands.
No, you moved to Holland.
Yeah, I went to graduate school for a while first, but...
Why Holland?
Because it was legal. You could work there without...
Even then? That
year.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. No, I went to work for a legal company in the Netherlands, which would have been absolutely impossible to set up in America.
Yeah,
it would still be super difficult today, even. So yeah, the Dutch were open to it.
And how has your research? Where has it taken you, and how has it developed? Regarding also there's new technology coming in, and you're also, gaining more experience and know-how and getting older and stuff like this. So how has it changed?
Personally, I've over time taken a broader and broader interest in the cannabis plant.
Okay.
And also in graduate school, I learned about ethnobotany.
Okay,
which is a wonderful subject. It's the nexus between anthropology, ethnography, ethnology, and plants. So it's the study of plant-human relationships.
Okay.
And there's no better plant to study than cannabis.
No.
There's no other plant that has so many uses or is found in so many cultures. So it's an ideal plant for study as an ethnobotanist.
Are you a user of cannabis today?
I am a user on occasion, yes, of course.
And how has that developed also throughout the years? How you've been using it, and
not much
how has
change
it affected
for me.
You personally?
Oh, it's a good thing for me. But that's the way I see it. I haven't seen any major changes in my relationship with cannabis. There's a lot of more products out there. Cannabis itself has changed, at least drug cannabis. There's been a lot of drug cannabis breeding. There's seed companies now. There's all kinds of accessibility that didn't used to be there.
But breeding cannabis, are you talking about genetic, doing a surgical thing on the genetic and changing it? What do you mean?
No. Genetics, plant breeding relies on genetics.
Yeah.
And more recently on genomics, the study of genomes. But if you're talking about genetic engineering, GMO, those kind of things, no, not at all. Everything that's been achieved, all the advances you see today, are the product of simple Mendelian breeding. Taking two parents with desirable characteristics and mating them.
Again and again.
Again and again, with the same goal in mind.
And what happens to during this? What are people looking for?
They're looking for potency. Usually, that was the number one thing. Still is. That's a problem in the legal drug cannabis side. Is it's all about potency.
When you say potency, you mean the high contents of THC.
The THC level as printed on the label.
And what happens when you raise, the amount of a THC in a plant? What happens?
You need to use less because it's stronger. It
Yeah,
would be
but
analogous to drinking whiskey instead of beer.
yeah, but what about this balance between, cannabinoids? You mentioned 8, let's say CBD and THC. What about the balance of these two cannabinoids together when used?
Well, that's more into the medical side again. I can use Sativex as an example. CBD is in there to lower stress responses.
The CBD.
Especially THC can be very stressful for people, especially ones who never used it on their own and have just been told by a doctor, take this.
People get paranoid and stuff like this.
They get high.
Yeah.
And people who haven't been high before or don't want to be high at all.
No.
Or maybe don't even drink or smoke cigarettes or taking any drugs.
No.
They're uncomfortable. Can be very uncomfortable. Yeah. And CBD tends to ameliorate, to soften that reaction.
So is it right to say that, I was talking to this guy last week, he was talking about this small isolated place or an island even on Jamaica where there was growing some like old school natural marijuana plants. Is it safe to say that when a plant is in this environment, in this settings, completely unaffected by other plants throughout like hundreds of years maybe, is it like a fully natural divine state of the plant because the cannabinoids are balanced, or what?
No, it has
what I
nothing
mean?
to the varieties like you're talking about are traditional farmer varieties. They're called land races. This is really a buzzword these days in the trade. And those are the original building blocks of all the hybrid varieties we have these days. That they're all hybrids these days. They're all polyhybrids. They have many different land races mixed together in their genomes. And those are the basic building blocks. And those evolved as a combination between what the farmers wanted the plant for and what the environment allowed. So it's natural selection on the part of the environment, modified by human selection, by breeders, essentially, even if they're doing it unconsciously.
Is it possible to buy cannabis in the States, which are more like eco-friendly, not being fiddled with, like organic or original plant?
There are people who do grow the original land races when they can find the seeds, which is increasingly difficult.
Okay.
There are people who would favor those varieties, but they're not agronomically profitable. They're not the varieties that
people want.
No, they're definitely the varieties people want, but they're not the varieties that people can make money from.
How come?
Because they mature too late. They don't have a high enough yield. They're not potent enough. They're not what the market has been forced into wanting because they don't have very many choices. And the situation in California, for instance, to use as an example, has really, really killed it.
What do you mean? How come?
It's really almost impossible to grow cannabis for a profit. And it's so, there's no room for anybody to experiment. If they're still managing to stay in business, they have to turn 5 crops a year. They have to grow something that's fast so they can turn 5 crops a year. It has to mature very quickly. 7-week plants are ideal. There are very few plants that reach
7 weeks. That's like really fast.
That would be what everybody's dreams about. But if you have a 10-week plant, 70-day plant, it doesn't fit into people's grows. And a lot of the variety, the variation, the biodiversity in cannabis is not appropriate for growing, especially indoors, but even in greenhouses or outdoors. It just takes too long to finish.
Do you think the THC, the high quantity of THC in like normal day weed, which people are smoking today, do you think it's causing stress and even like psychotic episodes or something like this? Is it a good thing or a bad thing, you think?
I think, as I said before, it's not for everybody, but if something's twice as strong and you want the same effect, you should consume half as much.
Yeah.
And these days, it's once again back to the problems with legalization, or I should say regulation. It's not that it's legal, it's that it's regulated.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because you're now forced under these systems to fit into a certain track or you're out of business.
Yeah.
The other problem with regulation is taxation. I mean, there's so many hidden costs. Analysis, certificates of contents to certify that your variety is okay, testing for biological contaminants. All that stuff's great, and you need it in a regulated industry, but it shouldn't be so costly.
No.
And the farming is farming. Fishing is fishing. You guys have fishermen here. You used to have small boats. They were small fishermen, like small farmers.
Yeah, but
now you got giant factory,
by big boats.
factory boats, and the fish sells for less than ever. Because they control the markets.
Is this the future for hemp growing?
It's the future for anything that becomes totally regulated and profitable, because those who have more money can use it to make more money, and they will control things. That is the natural flow of business. I'm not saying it should be otherwise, but it's what we should expect.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned different seeds and you have the original, like the founding block, how important is it to build like a bank of seeds?
Super important. Unfortunately, because of its illegal status, established seed banks don't have cannabis seeds in them. Some of them may have some industrial hemp varieties from EU-approved hemp varieties or something, like you're allowed to grow here. But that's it. And the travesty is that well-meaning smokers and breeders and growers took their seeds to other countries, to Nepal or India or Jamaica or Afghanistan or anywhere you can name that had building block land races, and they ruined them. They intercrossed with them, and genes intergress. They go back and forth between varieties whenever you cross them. Then you have an offspring population, and they breed freely with either side. Then those genes are exchanged. It's like a bridge between them. The crossing's a bridge for genes. The problem is that those varieties aren't giving genes. It's not a two-way flow.
No.
The introduced varieties are genetically invasive. They don't go grow on their own without care, like lupins around here. But they impart things on the native populations that makes them less adapted and more like Western cannabis, like Western hybrids. The real problem with this is because we've never had gene banks, we have a very, very narrow gene pool. And we have pest problems like crazy. And nobody has a way to go back. Whenever a normal agriculture has a pest problem, a disease problem in particular, they can go back and find resistant varieties that were the founding blocks, the foundation blocks of whatever modern varieties they have. Maize is a great example. They made a big mistake. They had cytoplasmic male sterility, and it turned out that unknown to them, of course, great idea, but unknown to them, it gave a susceptibility to a blight. And they had to go back to ancestor varieties and find ones that were resistant and do the breeding process over again. Didn't take them very long, but they had gene banks to turn to.
Yeah, exactly.
They already had all those things. And there's native populations still. Now, if you go to Mexico, there's GM genes in every maize variety in Mexico. It wasn't legal. Mexico had a prohibition against any GM products. They still do. for farmers, but they sent GM corn to Mexico.
Okay.
What do farmers do when their wife gets a bag of new corn? The seeds look different. They plant them. Farmers are curious. So,
what
same thing.
what variety would we be using in Iceland or like these northern places? You know, now you are experiencing the Icelandic summer. We probably have around 9 degrees. You know.
Frankly, this is the wrong end of the planet. But you're just too close to the poles. But that would be totally
But is it possible?
Yeah, it is possible.
Because I've seen 3-meter high plants here in Iceland outdoors. Sure. I've seen it.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And those plants are fine for industrial uses, but you can grow them up real tall, but that's half the battle. You have to dry them, ret them, extract the fiber, or have this, if you're going after seeds, have a longer season so the seeds can fully mature, which is, I'm not sure that's possible, or even with fanola and the real fast varieties, that's pretty tough.
But for the fiber, we have a chance.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. As long as you buy seeds from, I mean, the French varieties grow just fine here in a good year.
You've been traveling now. You came here to Iceland like a week ago?
No, day before yesterday.
No, you just arrived.
Yeah,
okay.
First visit.
Have you seen any fields now?
Yeah, we saw a field yesterday, and we're
halfway.
Where hemp had been grown previously, and had good years in the past. It's his third year in that spot.
Which has some has some meaning for the soil, you mean, or?
Well, it's the same soil again, pretty much. The same farmer. That's the weather. I mean, the seeds went in the ground at the same time, and they sat there in cold, wet, cold weather, and seeds are in a refrigerator, don't germinate.
No,
it's really it. And they came up when it finally got warm enough, even though it was still rainy and not so nice, but it got warm enough for them to germinate. But by then, the weeds had germinated, because weeds are adapted here. So the native plants that are weedy in a hemp field took over.
But there are some varieties that can actually work in a cold season, like here in Iceland.
Not really.
No.
What you guys need to do is breed your own varieties.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the answer.
And how would we do that?
You would start with what's already available and make selections from individual plants that did better than the population. So they'd start with something that almost works here, and then.
But we need like a scientific, approach to this process. Is it like a lab work?
No,
it's not.
It's farmer work, but you need a structured approach.
Yeah.
So you need a focus.
Yeah.
All breeding projects need a focus.
Yeah.
And the fewer traits you work on at once, the better the chances of success. Unless you have huge populations. If it takes 1,000 plants to find one trait you're after, it takes 10,000 plants to find one plant that has both the traits you're after. And it gets out of hand very quickly. So if you have something that almost matures here, you want to find the individuals that did mature.
Yeah.
And the 1 out of 100 or the 1 out of 1,000. Try to work with those.
So you need to be on the lookout.
Yeah. Diligence and focus. It's all about focus.
When I started using cannabis 20 years ago or so, there was only hashish in Iceland because we were not growing it in Iceland. It was never grown by anyone, and it was easy to import. Because it doesn't smell that much and it doesn't fill that much in the luggage. Yeah.
Sure.
So it changed after the like the big economic crash. Because then we got less hash for the currency, and people started to see, possibilities in growing it here, which they have been doing for many years successfully, but illegally, of course. And now the police has been doing a lot of like hard razzias, on it. So they're beginning to they've started, they've stopped growing, a lot here in Iceland. So we're beginning to see hash coming into the market again. You wrote a book 1998 called Hashish, and I have this question. Why, of course, why, do you write this book, and this tradition in Europe with hashish? Why has it been bigger in Europe than in the States? What's the different? What is hashish? How is it made? There's a lot of questions. If you can educate us.
I'll start with the last one and go in reverse.
Yeah.
Hashish is a mechanical concentration of the resin glands of female cannabis plants. And they're mechanically removed, either by drying the plants first and sieving out the resin glands, which are a powder. If they're not too warm, they're not sticky, and they are free-flowing, and they go through sieves.
These are small, like crystals in the
they
in the
call them
flower.
crystals, but they're when they're dried out, they look more like a golden sultana. They're turgid and round when they're fresh, and they wrinkle up. But they get rather hard. They're still sticky when they're warm, but you can sieve them, especially at low temperatures and dry conditions. And that's why countries like Afghanistan and Lebanon and Morocco were places that dry, sieved hashish came from, because they had dry, cold winters where they could work with the powdery substance. Not to be confused with what everybody is calling hashish, which are solvent extractions. Doesn't matter what solvent you use. You're dissolving the active ingredients into a liquid, and then removing the liquid and leaving behind the resin that you extracted, the contents of the hashish. But hashish itself is mechanically produced at all. If you just press the flowers, like making rosin, then I would still call that hashish, although it's in a liquid form like extracts. But that's only a new thing that kind of pushed.
How much quantity of flour do you need to make, like one? How many grams of flour do you need to make 1 gram of hashish?
Well, making hashish is not particularly efficient. That's why a lot of people like the extracts. It's much more efficient. You get almost everything out of it, and some things you don't want. But it takes a lot of dry flowers to make hashish. I mean, good hashish, the extraction rate is 1,000 to 1.
Wow.
For the very, very best. But at the same time, you're also going to have, for the 1,000 kilos that makes 1 kilo, you're going to get 10 kilos of almost as good, and as many kilos as you want of bad hash. You just push more leaves through. It's a matter of going for volume instead of quality. So there's always a ratio, there's a trade-off there. But there's waste. It's not nearly as efficient as just drying a flower and smoking it.
Are they getting awakened up to hashish in the States?
Recently, yeah, more like traditional hashish. The extracts have always been really strong there.
Okay.
But that's...
And are they producing it in the States?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, cool. Yeah. States are actually producing cannabis for much of the world these days.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if California flower showed up here.
Okay, really?
I mean, it's so cheap in America these days. It's really easy to grow cannabis. I mean, of reasonable quality. If you have to compete with other growers, it's a little more difficult. But the trouble with cannabis has always been converting it into money.
Yeah.
And that's the same with fiber. It's the same with seeds. It's the same with the drug sides of it. And that's all. It's easy to grow, but it's hard to convert.
But you wrote this book. What drove you to write this book?
I moved to Amsterdam.
Okay, so where you?
I moved to a predominantly hashish culture.
Yeah.
Sure, we had hash in California too, but if you grew up in Toronto, in the east coast of Canada, you had a lot more exposure to hashish than you did even in New York across the border. We've always been a marijuana country. Close on our doorstep was Mexico, Jamaica, Colombia, and a whole bunch of smaller producers. And later in time, we got Thai sticks from Thailand and some other exotic weeds, African things occasionally. But the big volume was from Mexico and Colombia.
Do you think the population of hashish versus weed in Europe has something to do with where we are lying? Like,
Absolutely.
You know, because we have this direct line to Morocco and Afghanistan and places like this.
Yeah, it was just overland to all those places, or predominantly overland for people, and those are on Europeans' front doorstep, basically. Yeah. So the culture really varied.
Okay.
And that was about availability, really.
And what did you find out writing this book? How did it expand?
I've got very interested in the people.
Okay.
The cultures that produced hashish. So the ethnobotanical side started.
Did you travel to these different places? Then,
Some of them,
while writing the book.
Not so much. No. I mostly got information from people who lived in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
There were many
colleagues and friends.
Many people involved with the hashish trade in those days. And it was available in all the coffee shops, and it was a very open scene. But that's basically where I got that information. And experimenting. We made a lot of our own hash.
Yes, sir. Legalizing cannabis. You know, what... I'm not going to ask you about your opinion about it, but, you know, how has it... Do you think it has a big effect on a collective consciousness of a country like, you know, the States? Do you think something happens due to the legalization of cannabis? You know, because I know what alcohol does to people. You know, what happens when you legalize cannabis?
It makes it more available, but the main thing it does is it takes away the illegality. I know that sounds stupid because you're legalizing it, but when people can approach a plant without worrying about what other people are going to think about them, or what the law is going to think about them, or whether they're going to have their children taken away, or lose their job, or go to jail, then people can really understand what the plant's about.
It's a completely new reality.
For each individual, yeah, it is, for sure. There are also people who just never were affected by those ramifications. There's a few people who just ignored it all, but most people can't. And it's not a wise thing to do. No. So, yeah, it's opening up the same new frontiers that it opens up for research. It just takes off the handcuffs, makes an even playing field.
And is it happening in Europe as well, the legalization?
Yes,
I heard something about Germany next year.
It won't be next year, but everybody's looking towards Germany. But I just spoke to somebody from Germany this morning, and it's a slow process. What they're talking about now in Germany is making a system that's more like Barcelona, more like the social clubs. They have to be nonprofit.
Okay.
They can't sell. This is not law yet, okay, everybody. This is just what they're talking about. But it's a government white paper. But for now, at least, and for the near future, even after this gets started, the first thing they're doing is decriminalizing it. That is the best step. But how they're going to handle the sales and taxation and all of it is nobody really knows yet. But so far they're trying to take the profit motive out of it. There won't really be a dispensary model. There won't be any. There'll be sales only to members of the social club, like there is in Barcelona.
So they're trying to getting it focused and restricted.
Right, but there will be no exchange of money.
Oh, how does it work then?
Members get what they
pay, like a monthly fee.
They pay a monthly fee or whatever. We have no idea. Nobody has any idea how that's going to work out.
I find that it sounds really complicated and maybe a little bit unnecessary. I don't understand why they should be doing it in this way.
Because I'll make another rather cynical comment. Because they want to maintain control, and they don't want to happen what's happened in California,
which is
and Thailand, and places where you legalize but without any structure.
What happens then?
You ruin the industry. You kill it in its infancy.
But people get weed.
People get all the weed they want, but they're still paying what they did when it was illegal.
Yeah. Because
the taxmans and the middlemen are taking everything along the way. And the farmer, like all farmers, gets screwed in the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's the guys who buy your fish and sell your fish and move your fish around the world to make the money.
Mm-hmm.
And that they don't share very well.
Mm-hmm. So maybe some kind of a middle way would be a nice option.
I think the Dutch system has worked very well for years.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Could you explain a little bit how the system works?
yeah, it still remains a bit of a gray area. The
Like
Dutch,
in Denmark, is it completely different from Denmark?
completely different.
Completely.
Every country has a different. Even countries that are semi-legal or legal or whatever, everybody has a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of silly. They don't really learn from other people's successes or mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Denmark, like the Netherlands, is relatively tolerant,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have a legal system.
No.
I mean, if you go to,
Holland hasn't a legal system around it.
it's not entirely legal.
Sounds strange.
It is a bit strange, but a coffee shop, as I understand it, unless things have changed, they don't pay taxes on the weed they sell.
Okay.
They pay taxes on the weed they sell, but they don't call it that.
No.
They pay taxes on profits, but that came from incidentals or soft drinks or
Stuff like this.
coffee.
That's why it's called coffee shops.
There you go.
Yeah.
Orange juice they sell.
But
or
do they
whatever.
pay permit to be able to sell
I
cannabis?
believe there is a licensing fee.
Mm-hmm. So
to be
there's a
able to do
licensing
this.
fee and then tax on
Sure.
other.
Tax on sales like there is
Yeah,
on
yeah.
sales of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't actually declare it as cannabis sales.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this has changed, please somebody, correct the audience.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how it always has been, which is a gray area sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They call it the magic kilo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Coca-Cola comes in the back door and 5-gram bags of weed go out the front door.
Mm-hmm.
And the government gets their money.
Mm-hmm.
This is not black.
No.
This is definitely
No.
approved. But it's kind of a in-between system.
Mm-hmm.
It is for profit, and it's widely available, and you don't have to be a member, and you can walk in. Anybody can walk in. You don't have to.
And is it working?
You have to be an adult.
Do you think it's is there a good effect from legalizing cannabis in places like Holland? Now it's been legal, tolerated for all these years.
Right.
Is there like a result of how it has like affected the like for example the drug abuse
Right.
on other substances and stuff like this?
Yes, it has had a positive effect.
How do they measure it?
There's plenty of reports that have been put out about the efficacy of what's called the Dutch model.
Okay.
And the Dutch sociologists tried to advertise and get other countries to go with their model for the last 40 years, and nobody's really listened to them. They've kind of given up, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason they did it in the first place was to separate soft and hard drugs,
Mm-hmm.
saying that coffee, cannabis are soft drugs.
Okay.
They don't say alcohol is a soft drug, but
No.
they tax the hell out of it and take the money. And they also have educational systems and health systems that help people with any problems that arise from alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And it's effectively has separated the two.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, this is just things I remember from the past. It's easy to look up. But they used to say that about 10% of people in America had tried cannabis,
Mm-hmm.
mostly when they're young.
When was this?
This was maybe 10 years ago,
Okay.
10, 15 years ago.
Do you know how the numbers are today?
I don't know, but I wouldn't say it's changed much.
Okay.
There may be more people willing to say they do,
Yeah, exactly.
which would skew the statistics.
Yeah,
But the Dutch claimed at the time that about 5% of Dutch people.
Yeah,
young people.
because there's a lot of like cannabis tourism. There are a lot of tourists coming to Netherlands, to Holland for smoking.
There were more than now, but yes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And neighboring countries, they didn't like that.
No.
But they all took the approach, you go do it in the Netherlands and don't do it at home and whatever.
But what you're saying then, the Dutch people, it didn't affect the Dutch, people in that way that they started, using more of cannabis themselves.
If anything,
less.
Less, yeah.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. And the reason for that is that it's accepted and talked about.
Uh-huh.
It's we can talk about it around the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not clandestine.
No, don't need to go behind anything.
Right, you don't need to go hide and do it. It loses its mystique. It becomes more normal. I mean, the only reason we snuck around drinking is because we had to hide from our parents.
Yeah.
But
and now we need to hide cannabis from the government.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's it's a psychological thing. I think this mystique. People want to experience something that's a little bit dodgy and on the edge. It's accepted culturally. It's not a big deal.
No.
It becomes really just a personal decision about whether you enjoy it or not, or whether it's medicine or not, or whatever you want to call it.
Interesting. I think we are getting close to the end.
All right.
Robert, is there anything else you would like to add? You know, now you've been here for a couple of days. You're staying here for how many days more? 3-4 days?
3 or 4 more days. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what you've seen here in Iceland. You know, is there anything we should? Do you have any advice for us? What we should be focusing on, and where we are? Where do you think we are, and where we are going? Because we're a little bit in the dark.
Right. Around the world, the medical side has a lot of traction. And I don't know how your medical community is at all. I mean, I've been in Sweden recently. The medical community is not accepting at all.
No.
In the Netherlands, more so.
No.
You know, but yeah, it's just been accepted there longer. Medical side gets a lot of traction because it really is a quality of life issue. But you need people who want this research done.
Yeah.
You need doctors who have patients who say, this stuff works, who believe the anecdotal evidence enough to want to get solid evidence. Then they go to the government, to health officials, and start prodding them to allow things to happen. And things always happen very slowly, but you need a little crack in the wall.
But it has a domino
medical
effect.
can do that.
You know, when one nation starts to legalize, then the other one follows, and so on. And
yes and no. I see kind of the opposite going on at the moment.
Okay.
Which surprises me, but as the irony is that America has told the entire world that cannabis was their problem and to stop supplying it, stop growing it, eradicate it so it doesn't make it to America and cause problems. We can't do that anymore because America doesn't hardly import any weed anymore anyway. No. We grow all our own. We're an exporting nation, if anything. So the shoe is now on the other foot. We can't blame it on other people. And at the same time, we're actually liberalizing and legalizing. And before Canada to the north of us has complete legalization. Australia has medical. There are other Western models that have moved in a more liberalizing direction. At the same time, you have countries that are cracking down.
Just closing.
Just closing up. They don't want to hear about it. They're passing more and more strict laws. So it's a lashback, I guess you'd say. But on average, I don't think the world is getting any closer to having international legalization.
And you don't think that's
ultimately? I think it'll happen.
Affected by the the power big pharma has and the influences on the health system.
You know who's really worried? Not big pharma. It's alcohol.
Really?
Yeah, it's the alcohol industry. It's really worried. Because people don't smoke weed instead of taking pharmaceutical drugs.
It's a lot
but they might drink less beer if they smoke a little weed.
Do you have any statistic from the States regarding this?
No, not at all.
But this is really interesting.
Bet you can find them, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is interesting.
Yeah.
So people smoke more, drink less.
That's what I'm not sure there's a statistic about it, but that's what the alcohol industry is worried about. Yeah. That's what
And you know, alcohol here in Iceland is sold by the government.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
You know, in like government shops, like in other countries.
I visited one today.
Okay, cool.
It's absolutely shocking.
Yeah, the price as well.
Yeah, of course. When you see I visit Sweden a lot. I've been there quite a bit lately. And they have Systembolaget. They have a government-run system, just like you have. Very little competition. And I'm surprised as an American, we're very anti-monopoly, although we have plenty of them. We're just not supposed to. But I was surprised when I saw the variety you have in a government-run alcohol shop, the good signage. They can't have sales. They can't do anything that promotes the use of alcohol. In fact, the Swedes had probably wished that nobody drank, in theory, but they all drink, so that can't happen either. Not all, but majority of people have a drink. So it surprised me to see that. But the prices are super high. But Scandinavia is more expensive than Northern Europe, which is more expensive than Southern Europe, traditionally, just for everything. Life, renting a house, whatever. Here is astronomically expensive for everything. It reminded me immediately of Japan.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's I don't know how it gets that way. I'm not an economist, but it is shocking.
Still, it's floating with tourists. They come anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a unique...
You have a volcano and earthquakes.
You've got unique terrain here.
Yeah.
You get snow 12 months a year. I suppose somebody can go snow sporting if they want right now.
What, the last question here, what are you doing in Iceland? Maybe I should have asked you, in the beginning of the interview, but what are you doing here? You're staying for how long, and how are you going to use the rest of your trip before
I'm going to have fun looking around the museums, pretty much.
Okay, cool.
And that's a really good question, because it's a good segue into your next interview. Because I'm here with her.
Yeah, so you're here with her.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Skólund.
That's true.
Skólund.
And she came here for very interesting purposes, and she'll be happy to explain them to you.
Cool. Robert, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And enjoy your time
in
Iceland.
All right. Thank you very much.
You.